Hello, I'm Alex Metricardi, Chief Marketing and Public Relations Officer for Living Branches. Today is Friday, March 26th. Welcome, and welcome to Ed Brubaker, our Living Branches President and CEO. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, Alex, and it's nice to see you have your COVID t-shirt on. I do not. I discovered this morning it must still be in the wash this week.
Well, it's great that you don't, because then I will know that that's this week's video without
that's right. You don't have to check the video.
You've solved my problem, so thank you. Let's start today with COVID case counts. We've had a couple of weeks, I think, with 0 to report, but today we are back up to 3 staff persons who've tested positive, 2 at Dock Woods and 1 at Souderton. And this is having actually a variety of interesting ramifications. One of those is, of course, the first question people will ask now is, well, were those people vaccinated?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And some were and some were not. And so we'll probably talk later about some of these breakthrough cases. But the challenge is this. Last fall, and I may have mentioned this in other videos too, but we were watching the case counts to see when it went beyond 5%. Yeah. Because 5% was a marker for how much we needed to test and actually start regular weekly testing. And then we blew past 5 and went past 10. 10% was twice weekly. This is for staff. The challenge is the case counts the percentages have been going down nicely over the last few weeks, and we're watching that, and it's easing back down. Both in Bucks County tends to be higher than Montgomery, but easing down toward 5%. But then the daily positivities were going up pretty substantially in Montgomery. So kind of like, oh no, this is going to be a potential problem. So this week, actually, after going down for quite a few weeks, it ticked back up from 5% last week to 5.2% this week. And these numbers are higher than what they were last September and October. So you'd need to look at those things for comparability, because it's easy to think that we're going in good directions. And I think overall we are. And certainly the vaccine is great. But you have to think about it in context. And so we are not out of this yet. The variants, depending what you read, can be a challenge. So we still need to be aware. Obviously, we're separated, but we got to still wear these things in public.
Yep.
And I know I don't, obviously, in my private office, but when I go out of the office, that mask is on my face. And even though I am vaccinated and have been for almost 2 months now, very, very important.
And I think, at least for me, I was waiting for this beautiful, magical future day when we were all vaccinated and we wouldn't have to worry about this anymore. And that day, maybe that horizon is receding a little bit in my mind, because we are seeing that persons who are vaccinated can test positive. We have at least one that I know of that's symptomatic, although very mild symptoms, which is, of course, when you actually read what the vaccination information is, exactly what they told us would happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when you look at the vaccine, as our medical director, Dr. Hemowitz, would say, if people say, well, why get the vaccine? And his comment would be, so you don't die. And that's a kind of a very stark statement. But the point is it doesn't, in all cases, or prevent you from getting the illness or disease, but it tamps down the symptoms so it's not as serious. So I was reading a recent article about a nursing home in Kentucky that had, we call them breakthrough cases when you had the vaccine, and residents and staff were vaccinated. Staff was not as high a percentage as we are, but they had, I believe it was 30% or 30 people. I can't exactly remember which, but anyway, I think it was 30% or 30 people, that actually were vaccinated that came down with the disease. Some were symptomatic as well. 80 were not vaccinated who had the disease. So just that difference alone would show you that it made a difference, okay, the number of people that actually were infected. And then the seriousness of the illness was much less in the 30, the vaccinated group, than the 80. But it still was concerning because it was a variant in Kentucky that this was, and so needs to be paid attention to. But it just goes to show you continued importance of vaccine, continued importance of appropriate infection control techniques, just very important, because we all want to be done with this. I want to be done with this, but we're not done, and so we need to continue to stay disciplined, and we need to look at the facts, and we need to look at the logic of all of this and not have an emotional reaction to it, but really be thoughtful and say, okay, what is the data telling us? What do we need to pay attention to? But it's clear we are not done with COVID.
Yeah. And maybe just to share that this question of variants is starting to come up in Montgomery County now. So at least I think 2 of those swabs that we took from the positive staff persons we're passing on to the state, where they're going to do some analysis to see if we do have a variant. But we're not expecting those results back for quite a while, is what I understand. They're very backed up.
Yeah, I think that takes a while, and so we won't know that reality for a while. But it does kind of set you back until you start looking at the facts and the data and kind of reminding yourself what's going on. But I think I'll have to admit I was hopeful that the vaccine would at least put these kind of breakthrough cases off till later. Yeah. But it is what it is, and we need to keep paying attention.
The other thing that we're doing now is I think we're confusing a fair number of people because we are all accustomed to our maybe fall and winter guidance, which said as soon as anyone tests positive, everything in the unit shuts down. And now because we do have new guidance from the state, it's slightly different. So maybe we should talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that's a good point because it does get confusing. And I'll be honest, some of the things we know do not seem like a logical progression. But I think we also need to understand that if all of us took the same scrutiny on our own personal lives related to logic of behavior that we are ascribing now to governmental agencies and others, we would find, I think, that we are as illogical as what we accuse others of being. Okay, I just think that's a reality. So we always love to think we're the logical ones and everybody else is the ones that really need some remediation. Mm-hmm. So that would be the first thought. But secondly, I think we've also realized as people and as governmental regulatory agencies that we really worked hard to keep people physically safe. But the emotional health of people really was sacrificed. And so honestly, the new visitor policies, from a technically keep you safe physically standpoint, probably are not the best. But we are whole people. We need to think about more than just the physical. So when we shut down dining for vaccinated residents and we have to keep it closed for 14 days, whereas visitors can come back after we do one round of testing and nobody else was positive with the disease, they can keep coming, all these unvaccinated persons from the community. The first response is, logically, that doesn't make sense. But it really, the regulations may update over time, first of all. But secondly, I think it's a recognition that it's important to have visitors. And so it's trying to find that balance. And it can be confusing, but read the website. We'll try to keep it as clear as we can, but it's a challenge, and it's not always as logical as what we may hope it to be, but it's kind of the reality of life.
And again, it goes to why we are asking visitors who are coming, even if you're vaccinated, even if your resident is vaccinated, you still please have to wear your mask and practice social distancing or physical distancing, because if someone tests positive, we're still shutting down dining for 2 weeks. We're still shutting down activities for 2 weeks. And that impacts our residents as well.
Yeah, it does.
They're happy to have visitors, but those things are important too.
That's right. And it becomes this kind of up and down roller coaster that really is challenging because you're like so hopeful. And I think it was at the Willows a few weeks ago, we opened it up, and this was even before the visiting guidelines, because we opened it up for other reasons that we had our own practices and policies that we were piloting. And I think 2 days later, we shut it down.
Yep.
And so it really becomes challenging from a roller coaster, both for staff, but obviously also for residents as well. So I think it's going to be like this for a while. And we're just going to have to try to make sense of it and do the best we can and support each other.
Now, maybe another topic that we should talk about that perhaps also isn't quite as logical from a pure physical protection standpoint, but also equally emotionally important, is the ability of residents in personal care, memory care, and healthcare to go home and visit with family. And so that's maybe the big announcement that we're making today, is that we're getting ready to roll out guidance on how that can take place for vaccinated residents.
That's right, and that's the key there. We will only allow vaccinated residents to be in that category. And I would say the vast majority of our residents are vaccinated. But yes, but that may or may not always, okay, you can go home, but then you can't do this other activity, and I get that. But there's going to be those kinds of realities that it may be confusing. It may not be 100% logical, but it's a way to try to thread the needle of how do we get through this and accommodate the desire for human interaction and the emotional needs for human interaction, but also to try to monitor which might be a higher risk activity than another one. So for instance, our staff was saying, well, why can't I eat with another? I'm vaccinated, my coworker's vaccinated, why can't we be at the same table? Mm-hmm. I see the residents across the room.
In residential living.
In residential living, yes, you're right. Sitting across the table from each other, they too are vaccinated. And so the logic is, why is that logical? Well, I understand at first blush, but then when you start saying, our staff members are all throughout the facility. If they're a caregiver, they might be going from resident to resident to resident. They're going home at night. They're not in as tight a bubble. And so there's other risk factors that need to be considered. But I understand that at first blush, they might say, this isn't logical. But we need to break it down and say, here's some reasons. And we did allow staff to have two at one table outside, but this was an issue about inside dining.
And I think we're just going to continue with this for the foreseeable future. We'll take things as they come and make the decisions that we need to be as maybe even permissive as possible, while still making sure we're holding tightly to those core infection control processes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think people are going to be hearing about core infection control processes for a while to come.
And hand washing is very important, but I can't overemphasize this. Just really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you'd like to discuss today?
Well, I'm glad to be at this place. I would also say, to be perfectly blunt, it's a little disconcerting when you see where the numbers are going. It's disconcerting when it seems like, we can't get the vaccines at times as quickly as we like. When we kind of know that probably by May or June we might have a glut of vaccines. So we're in this, I would say, unsettled time that frankly maybe today feels a bit more unsettled than it did a month ago when we were rolling out vaccines. So it's just this strange place again. But we will get through this. We will get to the other side. But we still have a ways to go. And I guess for me personally too, I like to control and what I can. And I really am a believer that all things are solvable. You just need to think of the right solutions. And frankly, even with COVID, all things are solvable. But it doesn't mean they're immediately solvable or that they'll be done tomorrow. And so that's sometimes the frustration that we're ready to be done, but we still have work to do. So I really appreciate the excellent work of staff, just really have done great work over this past year and continue to do so. but also the resiliency of residents and their families as well. This has been a challenging year, and but overall, people have really done amazingly well, really amazingly well.
Yeah. And it's encouraging to see that.
That's right.
Yeah. So, well, thank you. Thank you to our viewers. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to send them to coronavirusquestions@livingbranches.org. You can always check our website for updates, and we'll talk to you later.